Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest episode of Fiction in Real Life. I am Julie Daines, and I'm here with Jennifer Moore and Heather B. Moore. And we're excited to bring you a fun new episode of some really interesting coincidences, connections. I'm not sure what to call it. But first, we do have our giveaway. It is Where Dreams Meet. It's a really fun story about the American, I think it's a collection of short stories about the American frontier. So make sure to leave a comment here or on YouTube or wherever you're watching in order to be entered to win a copy of Where Dreams Meet. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with Heather.
So I don't have a story this time. Oh, wait, I do. Okay, I forgot. Okay. I was thinking I could cut that part out really quick.
Fine. We're professional. This is how we roll.
Okay, so this is my story. So this is a book. And it came out in, let's see, 1898, and it's called The Wreck of the Titan or Futility by well, in what I looked up, it said by author Robert Morgan, but if you look on it, it says Morgan Robertson. So that was probably just how sometimes an author had a pen name, but it was almost the same name as they had anyway. So, but this is just a huge coincidence because this was, of course, 14 years before the real Titanic met, and but there are similarities between this novella and the actual events. So in the novella, the fictional Titan was described as unsinkable, and it hit an iceberg on the starboard side of the ship, and it was 400 miles off of Newfoundland when they sank. And they both sank in April. And in both cases, of course, the passengers suffered tragically due to a shortage of lifeboats. So I just thought that was really, really interesting. Kind of makes
and
me.
This book was published when, did you say?
14 years before the Titanic.
Was it like a popular book? Had other people read it?
I don't know. I mean, 1898. So who knows? I mean, back then, popular was a relative term. If you sold like 200 copies, you might get another contract. If you sold 2,000, you're like a bestseller.
I mean, it's so, I mean, even the name of the ship.
Yeah.
It was just lends credence to those, conspiracy theories about the Titanic. Like maybe they got this idea or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very bizarre. Very interesting.
That is very interesting. Would you book it?
I mean, I kind of thought about like maybe it would be cool to book it, but I don't know if I'd want to book it because this is such a terrible, terrible tragedy. But maybe book it in a way where it was just some other event that was published in a book and then it repeated itself like 15 years later. So I don't know if I'd be in the point of view of the author or whose point of view I'd be in. But I think it'd be an interesting concept to really explore.
Yeah. How about you, Jen? Would you book it?
I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is it's like almost too big of a coincidence. And it like would not be believable in a story. I think readers would be like, okay, that was contrived by the author to be lazy and not do a good story or something. It almost seems like, I mean, like it had the same name almost and everything. It kind of just gives me the chills, but you're right. It does make it seem like a conspiracy. But yeah, I don't think I would.
I mean, I'm not really into the big Titanic conspiracy theories, but that does seem very coincidental. And I probably would not book it either, just because it is so close to the Titanic. And there's already so many lovely and good books out there if you want to read a good Titanic type story. So probably not up my personal alley. But weirdly, I have a story, and this is weird because I did not actually know what Heather's story was going to be before we started.
I didn't either, apparently.
But I have a story that kind of is along the same lines. And so this one begins in 1838 when Edgar Allan Poe published his novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. And in this story, Pym is, I think, like the captain or something of this ship, and they set out to sea, but there's a really terrible, well, first of all, there's a mutiny, and then there's a really huge monster storm. And so in the end, there's just these 4 people left on like a lifeboat type thing, right? And they know they're not, oh, and they find a sea turtle, and they eat the sea turtle, and then when that's running out, and they know they're not going to survive. I mean, obviously other stuff happens, but they decide that they're going to have to draw straws to see who will be eaten by the other people in order to survive. So they draw straws, and it turns out that the person who lost the straw poll and gets killed and eaten, his name is Richard Parker. Okay, so that was 1838. But now we jump forward to May in 1884. And this time, a real life ship called the Mignonette sets off to sea with 4 sailors in it. And they're supposed to deliver this new ship, the Mignonette, to Australia. But again, there's this huge monster storm, a huge wave comes, the ship kind of capsizes. Someone tries to grab a few rations and stuff, and they get on this lifeboat and they're adrift at sea. Well, they have some turnips canned or something, and they eat that and drink the water. They get some rainwater, they drink that, they drink their own urine a little bit. They find a sea turtle and they eat the sea turtle, and then that runs out. And in the meantime, there's this one kid who's freaking out, and he starts to drink the seawater. And that starts to make him really sick. You know, he kind of gets crazy. Then he gets like comatose. And anyway, so these people in the boat decide that someone has to sacrifice their life to be eaten by the other people. It's like the custom of the sea or whatever. And so in the end, they decide that they're going to eat the youngest guy. He was a 17-year-old cabin boy. And they basically kill him and eat him until they are rescued 5 days later. But his name was Richard Parker, the same name as in Poe's book. Okay, so I think that's super weird. And also, Jennifer pointed out that the name of the tiger in The Life of Pi is also Richard Parker, which I don't particularly think is a coincidence in this case. I think he purposefully chose the name. But anyway, so as I was like looking up stuff about this story, I came across this thing called literary prophecy. And I think it's super weird that on our episode about weird coincidences and connections, Heather and I both randomly, separately pick a story that has a literary prophecy in it, where a book is written and then a real life event almost exactly the same happens and comes true. Isn't that weird? I think that's weird.
That is weird. That's a coincidence.
Yeah, that's like a real life coincidence on top of the real life coincidence
right
that we're talking about.
So was Edgar Allan Poe's book fiction?
Yeah, his book was fiction, but it was written to be like, you know, the journal of the guy.
Uh-huh.
And then this real life story, when they got back to England, the captain was like, "Oh, guys, you'll never believe what happened." And he tells the whole story, and the sailors in the boat think that they're in the right. You know, they did the right thing because it was sacrifice one guy to save 3, right? But they ended up being arrested. They went to trial. They got accused. They got sentenced to death, actually, for killing this boy. And they said, you know, it's murder. You know, you could have waited till he died and then ate him. But as it is, it was murder. So they all got sentenced to death. In the end, I don't think any of them actually were put to death. I think they all kind of got let off the hook because of the weird circumstances they were in. But so that's my story. The story of the random Richard Parkers on stranded lifeboats.
What if it was just a super common name too? I don't know.
It could be.
I mean, it's not that common.
Well, I mean, it's just so coincidental.
Yeah.
It is the same name, and
Right,
so
and the
many of the
same
same things happen. The
circumstance.
The die
storm,
the
the
same.
lifeboat, the
Mhm.
sea turtle. Then they
Yeah.
eat Richard Parker.
Yeah. I hope that's not one of those stories where you come back to life and suffer the same fate as your previous life.
Reincarnation. No matter what happens, you're going to be
Richard
eaten.
Parker's getting wow.
Yeah. So anyway, Jen, would you book it?
It's horrible, right? And do you remember that in the Heart of the Sea book? It's kind of similar. It's just that's a hard story for me to want to book. But I mean, the coincidence is almost just like too much where you're like, okay, wait, did Edgar Allan Poe really write that before? Or you know what I mean? I'm just trying to make it so it's not so weird in my head, and I can't.
Yeah, it's literary prophecy.
Literary
I
prophecy.
personally, so here's the thing. I probably wouldn't book that exact story as a story because it is a little gruesome. And in fact, when I wrote one of my other books, it was Willow Keep, and the girl was from a Hull, a northern seaport, up kind of in the Yorkshire area. And I did do research and find out another horrible, gruesome story about a captain's cruelty at sea to a younger cabin boy, you know, and I wanted to include that in the story. So I just kind of gently retold that story as she is sort of mentioning it to someone else so that I could include the realism of situations like that actually happened. But I didn't want to tell like the whole story of that. I didn't want to make that the whole story. That's, you know, too unhappy of a situation.
If it ever happens and we're at sea, you guys go ahead. I do not want to starve to death, so just get rid of me. And I am sure I have a lot of marbling, a lot of fat. Just dig in.
I sometimes think that by the time you resort to cannibalism, the marbling is a little bit more used up.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I'm not to sound too macabre, but I, have read several books about the Donner Party as well. So, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, Heather, how about you?
So if I was going to book it, I would replot it a little bit to where, the real Richard Parker, he's not educated. He's illiterate. He goes on this voyage, and someone like the captain or one of the stewards like reads this book. Like it's just, he reads it every night as they're, sailing along. And it's a little bit of a joke on the ship that, oh, you're Richard Parker too. Ha ha ha. And then this storm comes and he gets in the situation. And as the days pass, Richard hears the men whispering about him at night. And then it's divine providence that he's here. It's a sign from a higher power that he's going to save us by dying. And so then, Richard gets away. So that would be my story.
That's
wow,
dark.
she's already plotted a whole entire novel, and I already want to read it.
Dark, Heather.
So it has a good ending. I mean, it's definitely a suspense novel.
I really like it because it is dark, but also, it's at sea, it's survival, it's adventure, it's all that stuff. So yeah, I will read it, write it, hurry, quick. So yeah. All right, Jennifer, do you have a story?
Yep. And my story is a total coincidence that's just kind of lighthearted and weird and funny. So it is in a book by Joseph Mazer called Fluke. And anyway, it is about a 19th century French poet, Émile Deschamps. And he has this funny coincidence that he experienced in his life. When he was a teenager, he met an English man named Mr. I don't know if it's Monsieur. I think it's Mr. Oh, he's English. Mr. de Fortescue. Mr. de Fortescue, who introduced him to plum pudding. And, I don't know what their circumstance was, but they had the reason to have a plum pudding that Mr. Fortescue, gave him. And then so like a decade later, Deschamps was in a restaurant and he saw plum pudding on the menu and he's like, oh, I remember this from that guy, Mr. Fortune. And so he ordered it, but the waiter's like, I'm sorry, we just gave away the last one to a man in the back of the restaurant. And so Emile Deschamps looks back and there's Mr. Fortune eating like the last plum pudding. Then, and they had like a chuckle. And then so like it says like another decade passed and Deschamps went to a dinner party that was serving plum pudding. And he was like, oh, I haven't had this since, Mr. Fortune was around. I bet he's here or something. And right then he walked in. So he had just like this weird little funny coincidence where every time, I guess, I don't know, he's French. Maybe they don't have plum pudding everywhere. So every time he ran into the plum pudding, Mr. Fortune was right there. So anyway, that's it. It's a simple kind of weird, random little funny story.
Yeah. Would you book it?
Yeah. I think that kind of thing is funny. And I don't know how to make it interesting enough for a story, but I mean, it was interesting enough as this little snippet that I was like, oh, that's clever. So anyway, yep, I thought it was.
How about you, Heather? Would you book it?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it would be a fun little part of a story. So I don't have a plot line for it yet, but I agree with you.
For another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I know.
I think I would book it too. I think it's those kind of little super subplots that just pop up through the book that make the readers kind of smile and go like, oh, that's, that's this little running joke or something like that just kind of creeps in through the story. It doesn't really make a big impact on the plot and everything, but
it's just fun.
So, okay, well, that is our episode for today. Don't forget to comment if you want a chance to win Where Dreams Meet. It's really great. And if you have a funny story or a coincidence or something that's creepy story, anything that just seems kind of out of the ordinary, be sure and send it to us to fictionirlauthors@gmail.com because we love to read them and we use them in our shows. And then it would be really helpful to us if you could also subscribe on YouTube, like and subscribe, and that would help us get some more viewers too. So, but thanks for joining us this time for Fiction in
Real
Life.